Yesterday, that is on August 24th, Ukraine celebrated its 31st Independence Day, even as it coincided with the 6-month anniversary of its invasion by Russia. With fears looming of a major strike by Russia, Ukrainians kept the celebration to a low-key, more personal level. Opposition Member of Parliament Inna Sovsun says although the mood was festive, there was also concern across the country about what Russia might do in the face of a reminder that Ukraine still defiantly remains an independent country. To understand what an invasion that was supposed to lead to the fall of the capital Kyiv in 72 hours after it began on February 24th this year is doing to the people of the country 6 months hence, Mayank Chhaya Reports spoke to Inna Sovsun. Incidentally, she was in western Ukraine to attend the wedding of her brother, perhaps as an act of small personal defiance in the face of the continuing existential danger to the country.
We are just a day after the 31st anniversary of Ukraine's independence, which coincided with the 6-monthly anniversary of the Russian invasion. What is the overarching sentiment across the country?
Well, yesterday, during the Independence Day, people were very cautious because a week leading to that, we were getting lots of news that there is an increased risk of a Russian missile attack. We were getting air raid alerts like the whole day. I think they had around 10 air raid alerts in Kyiv. I was traveling yesterday, so I was not getting the Kyiv air raid alerts. But even in the Western Ukraine, they would get like 6-7 air raid alerts during the day. What we know today, what the military are saying, is that there indeed have been much more planes that were taken off. But in terms of the number of missiles that they actually were trying to strike with, the number was not that big. So I think they were just trying to scare us as much as possible, which again speaks to the, craziness of those people. But I think that this was something that people were keeping in mind, is like we should be very cautious. And lots of people, like the morning I left Kyiv, I went outside of my apartment block and I went to my car to the parking place, and half of the parking spots were empty because I think many people have left the city for a couple of days because of those, potential missile attacks. But other than that, I think the mood altogether was very festive. And I can see that on social media. You can see that everywhere. A couple of days leading to the anniversary, I actually went to the shop to buy what was called a vyshivanka, which is a traditional Ukrainian short with embroideries. And I was just amazed with the line of people who were standing to buy vyshivankas. I've never seen that ever before. But I think this year people are just trying to reconnect with the past, to get back to this identity issue of who we are as Ukrainians, and getting back to the past in order to build a better future. And I was truly amazed with that. Like I was surprised. And some people in that store, they were actually speaking Russian or a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, but they were still buying Ukrainian national clothing. So I think that was, that is amazing. And many people were celebrating at home. Of course, the big public celebrations were not allowed. But I think what is more important is when people celebrated at home, not to do it for publicity, but because they feel how important this date is to all of them. And I think that is what we definitely did see yesterday.
How do you apprehend the death of Daria Dugina would trigger Moscow into inflicting even greater pain? Although Ukraine has clearly denied it, and it sounds absurd that Ukraine would have anything to do with it.
Yeah, indeed, because I think the Russians are in a pretty tricky situation, because if they want to claim, they did claim that Ukraine did kill Daria Dugina, then they have to admit that Ukrainian, special forces and security services are so strong as to plan this attack in the middle of Moscow during, this big war that we are fighting. So either we are very strong, or they are lying. And I think that they still haven't come up with a logical explanation of what is happening over there. But let me point out a couple of things on that. Number one, we have to recognize that Daria Dugina was not just a daughter of the Russian ideologue. She was, well, truth be told, as crazy as her father. So she was, She was, I think her dad raised her to be, a follower of his own faith. I don't know if you have seen that, but after her death, we didn't know about her here in Ukraine. We didn't know about her dad, of course. I didn't know about her dad, but we didn't know about her. But then after her death, several videos were, shared on Ukrainian media about her speaking in Russian television, where she would be saying like, yeah, we should be killing all Ukrainians. They are not a nation. They are Nazis, and so on and so forth. So she's not, an innocent Russian who fell victim to that. I'm not saying that she deserves to die. I'm just trying to say that painting, this picture of an innocent child of a bad person is wrong, because she was, a Russian propagandist as much as her dad, which again doesn't say that we have anything to do with her killing. I think that just makes no sense whatsoever. And the story that FSB came up with, again, I don't know if that was reported in your media, but basically the story that the Russians are telling is this, that it's a Ukrainian member of Azov battalion who came to Moscow with her daughter. And that is the most amazing part of this. Like, I mean, if you are planning a special operation, why would you bring in your 12-year-old daughter with you? It just makes no sense whatsoever. And driving a Mini Cooper, which again is not very much a spy car, and she was driving that car, following Daria Duhina in her Western-made Jeep, again to be noted. And then she blew her over, and she drove to Estonia. I mean, the story just makes no sense whatsoever. But I think that the Russians will, of course, try to play it as a way to mobilize their society against this war. Because what we are seeing, some polling that is being done in Russia, to an extent that any polling is possible in Russia at this point, but it suggests that less and less Russians are actually supporting this war. Because, the more people are getting killed, the more information there is about what is happening there. And you can, in theory, be supportive of this war, but when your son can be drafted to fight in this war, that changes the perspective a bit. So whether they can be, trying to use the killing of Dugina as a way to mobilize the Russian people, yes, they can. I mean, Ukrainians did defy this very strongly. They said that we have nothing to do with that, and just but whether that doesn't really matter what we say to the Russian audience internally. So the question is, to what extent the Russian audience internally will believe in the stories that they're spreading.
Right. 6 months ago, when Russia invaded, it was believed, including by the top US military brass, that Kyiv would fall in 72 hours. And yet here we are 6 months later. What does that tell you about Russia's military capabilities, or for that matter, US intelligence?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm still appreciative of the American intelligence. After all, they have been saying for, months leading to this war that the war is going to take place. And I think we were too much in a denial, because maybe it was just too scary to accept this. But anyways, they were indeed saying that, this is the reality. So again, I do believe that they have their own sources. But of course, estimating what will happen in the war is much more difficult, because you cannot, take into account things like the national spirit, which sounds uncalculable. It doesn't have a number you can put in. But I think that is something that did play a huge role. I'm now remembering the first weeks of this war in March, when I was seeing those huge lines of men and women standing in lines in the military recruitment office, just volunteering to get into the fight. I was seeing those, thousands of people who were, working in IT, marketing, whatever, who put on the military uniform and who were just patrolling the streets of Kyiv. I think the sheer number of people who suddenly decided to mobilize and to, with whatever, with Molotov cocktails, with whatever, I think that played a role. I think that, the level of commitment of the Ukrainian people, particularly in the first stages of the war, was an extremely important factor that nobody could factor in. That's something that couldn't be calculated. But also, I think that what was not taken into account as well was the fact that, yeah, Russian army is huge. It is the second biggest army in the world. And trust me, we're feeling this every single day with all those missile strikes and everything. But also it's very corrupt. And lots of things that they were supposed to have, they do have on paper, but it has been long stolen, And also, most important is the level of personnel, the quality of the personnel of the Russian army. I mean, the Ukrainian army has gone through lots of training in the last 8 years. Our military men and women were being trained, well, particularly in the UK. They've done quite a good job in terms of training. But my boyfriend went for trainings when he was still actively serving, like before, and so on and so forth. So I think Ukrainian army has changed. I mean, not enough, but still quite significantly. And the Russian army hasn't. They went on with very stupid tactics military-wise. I mean, with some things that you could have done like 50 years ago, but with the current technology, with the drones and everything, it's just not working. But they didn't take that into account. So I think that was another factor that was not, taken into account when making those predictions.
That leads me to wondering whether Putin could have captured the whole of Ukraine much earlier if he really could. Or do you think it's part of some unfathomable strategy that he has not done it?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I don't think he could have captured the whole of Ukraine. I mean, I'm not seeing that happening. And maybe a bigger part of it than he did, yes. But even now, with all the might that he has, he only captured 20% of Ukraine's territory, and that includes Crimea, which has been occupied long before, and parts of Donbass, which have also been occupied long before. So we still have 80% of the territory under the governmental control, and despite Russians putting the best of fight they have. So I don't think that was a feasible plan altogether. That does not mean that they are not causing lots of damage and sufferings in Ukraine. But by just grabbing the whole country, I mean, we are a huge country. We are a big country with lots of people, and I think that was, in a way, he was delusional. I don't see, show me a single example where such a big country was just captured by someone else.
Right. No, but from his standpoint, before he started, he had about 5% of Ukrainian territory under the Russian control. They've added 15% in 6 months. I'm just speculating, maybe he's in it for the long haul, thinking that we will just go on and eventually tire out the Ukrainians, because the West is not going to intervene anytime soon, other than pumping billions of dollars. Maybe he thinks he has time on his side.
Yes, that can be one of the strategies. That is something that we have to keep in mind and to be prepared for that.
Right.
And the truth is that Ukraine is holding because, of course, of our people, but also because of the Western help. And I believe that is the major question right now, is we need to be receiving continued support for our army from the West. Even in those areas that we still haven't received support, like tanks. We are still not getting any tanks from the West. And there seems to be some coordinated decision of not providing the tanks to the Ukrainian army, which I cannot explain from the military perspective. Right. I mean, show me a single general who can explain how we can go on counteroffensive without tanks. It's not possible, but this decision still has not been taken. So I think that, longer term perspective, this can be one of the ways for Putin that he thinks he can go forward. But there are two things that run against this. A, the sanctions are, after all, hurting his economy, particularly his ability to produce more military, munition, weapons, and all of that. Because unfortunately, let's say the truth, for the past 8 years, after Russia annexed Crimea, they were still buying lots of military supplies from Germany, from France, from other European countries, which of course should have been dealt with much earlier. But they were very much reliant, like electronics from the West. Now they have no access to that electronics anymore. So what can they do? Semiconductors, microchips, all of that, they do not produce that themselves. Well, the West can be producing that and can be helping Ukraine to receive that. So I think in his calculations of wearing us down, he doesn't take into account after all, quite a strong coalition to help Ukraine. and I think he's not getting the full picture about the potential of the Russian economy to continue functioning and produce, military, to meet the military needs under the sanctions.
I see. There are already some signs of invasion fatigue among the international community. I mean, I can see in the US, Ukraine has dropped off the headlines, unlike in the first couple of months. I mean, there are domestic compulsions that Biden has to address those as well. What do you think Ukraine can do to keep the focus of the international community more than it seems to be right now?
Well, of course, the major issue is not so much the public attention as the weapons that is being provided. And in that sense, I just want to thank all American people and the government for the present on the Independence Day, the recent announcement by Biden administration of the new military aid to Ukraine. We hope that in the next one, tanks would be included. That's the thing that I keep on repeating to everybody. So I think that, yeah, of course, that there is, a fatigue from the same type of news. And of course, we were aware of this, that this would be happening. So I think now we have to be much more inventive in terms of how to continue attracting attention to the situation over here in Ukraine. I'll give you one example, which I think is a good way to go about this. Most recently, with the help of our embassy in Berlin, they have brought in a car which has been destroyed by Russian tank as a family of 4 was trying to escape from Bucha, and this car was put on the public square in Berlin for people just to walk by and just to see how that really looks in reality. Because it's one thing seeing that on a TV screen, a picture or anything, but then when you see this is a real car. This is where people have been shot. And this is what the Russians are doing. I think that's one of the ways of going about this. This is, after all, how I do believe that soft power does make sense. And in that sense, I think we should be more strategic in continuing, this attention on what is happening in Ukraine.
Just last couple of things. One is I'm curious about what you think the invasion's long-term impact in terms of in sociological sector, say for instance, education of young people. I'm sure they are missing out a great deal because of the uncertainties. How do you think that might affect generations in the say next 5 to 10 years? Because it is going to be problematic.
It is, because add to that personal comment. My son is turning 10 in October, and he's going to the 4th grade. He is one of those kids who have been unlucky enough because during his whole school career, he didn't have a single school year where he was not studying online for some period of time because of COVID and now because of war. So now when all other kids in other countries are getting back to schools, our kids were not able to go back to schools over the springtime because of the war. And I, as a former First Deputy Minister of Education, as a university professor myself, I'm extremely concerned about this, about how that affects the quality of education of our kids. And now we are 1 week away from the start of the new school year. And there is a push from the government side to get as many kids to school, to the classrooms as possible. But the parents have the choice of whether to continue online studies or whether to go to the classrooms. I have decided that I want my son to go to the classroom. Okay. To be able to do that. But, now we are all having this big internal debate about the quality of the bomb shelters in our schools. Right. I just trust me, that is not the debate that you want to be having before the start of the school year. You want to care about the backpack you want to buy your son or anything like that. But we'll see what percentage of parents would actually opt for the offline schooling or which one will go for online schooling. Of course, like in cities like Kharkiv, the majority of kids would be who stayed in Kharkiv, which is a small percentage because the majority of the kids have left Kharkiv. But those who are still there, the schools will not reopen there. But I am extremely concerned, and I'm calling for the international community to pitch in to help as much as possible.
Sure. And finally, to conclude, at the societal level, how do you think it's impacting family structure, say things like marriages or personal relationships?
Well, we all know for sure that the war does not have a very healthy impact on the family relationships. I'm a daughter of a war veteran myself. My dad did serve in Afghanistan in a very complicated and messy war that the Soviet Union started. But regardless of that, I know what does it mean to be raised by a veteran, and I know that what I can say right now, that I understand that my dad did have a PTSD that was not dealt with. And I understand this now, but when you're a kid, a parent having some issues with I don't know, anger management or anything like that is problematic to accept. And he was not getting any help, of course, during the Soviet times. So I think it's crucially important to understand that this is a mental health issue on itself, and many families are extremely impacted by that. And I actually want to applaud here as an opposition member of parliament, but I think that the First Lady is doing quite a lot to raise awareness about the mental health issue during the war, and they're doing some good job on that. And reintegration of the veterans into the families and business, that would be a big challenge, of course. Kids who have been traumatized by the war. I had to deal with my son getting scared of sleeping at night. He would come over to me and say, like, "Mom, will the Russians come over the night and kill me?" That is like we all have been so traumatized by this war that I'm happy that there is at least a rising debate about this this issue, and I hope we would manage to overcome this. One good thing coming out of all of this is similarly to the situation in the US during the World War II, when women were called to work in the factories and all of that. Right now, I think that the situation for women is changing, because lots of women are actually serving in the army. We have about 17% of the military personnel who are women, and I think that this kind of challenges the stereotypical role of man as defender and woman as as a mother, and I'm happy as a long-term gender equality advocate. I'm seeing some positive things about that, and the same about LGBT people. We now know that there are LGBT people fighting in the army, and we have a 99% approval of anything that army does. So that starts to include LGBT people. So I think that the debate internally about what is important and what is not is evolving and in the right direction, I would say.